Hey everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every week. I'm Jess Farmery, your host today, and I'm here with our producer Adama, with Aahuti from the SomX team, and with a very special guest, Toby Basey-Fisher, who's CEO of Entia. Entia are a company on a mission to unlock the full potential of cancer care by predicting and preventing side effects, and they do this with remote monitoring, AI predictive risk models, and early interventions at home. So welcome everybody. Let's kick off on a nice positive note. Does anyone want to share a positive highlight from their week? Aahuti, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Jess. Lovely to be here with yourself and Toby and Adama. I have had so many highlights this week. Honestly, ending the week feeling quite grateful for the exposure and opportunities with lots of different groups and individuals and important work going on in the healthcare space. So if I had to pick one, I think what I'd like to do is give a mention to Young Lives versus Cancer. I was invited to a lunch that they hosted in London this week on Tuesday. And the purpose of the lunch was really just to raise awareness about the charity, of course, but importantly, something that I found to be very progressive in terms of sort of third sector initiatives was the launch of their innovation hub and the fund that goes associated with that. So they've actually established a team of people headed up by Helen McShane, and they have an in-house innovation hub, and they will be investing in companies' digital health solutions, help young people manage their cancer, help with their diagnosis, but importantly, help with what happens after cancer. And one of the things that I hadn't quite appreciated was the lingering impact on mental health for young people, even if they've come through that journey and they are in remission, can stay with them for 10 to 15 years. So really that intersection of cancer and mental health was really what kind of grabbed me at an emotional level on Tuesday, and hence why I wanted to give them a mention.
Oh, thanks, Aahuti. Yeah, that sounds like a great event. Toby, what have you been up to this week? Any particular highlights?
It's been a really great week, actually, our end. With very much at the sharp end of actually deploying with the NHS. So lots going on that front. But what really touched me this week, I think, was going back to my old university, Imperial College, and meeting with some of the team and individuals who are actually responsible for getting our company started and spun out from the university. I think what really stuck with me was two things. Like, firstly, was just how much investment is going into sort of innovation, solving real world problems, and actually trying to get this translation from sort of the research environment into sort of a real world impact. But I think the other thing that really stuck with me was actually hearing just how many people who I have worked with have either been experiencing firsthand, I think, the journey of cancer treatment, or have had family members recently going through it. And I think no matter where I seem to go, it's constantly brought home over just how difficult and how challenging cancer therapy remains for so many people, and just how much room for improvement there is. So I think builds a lot of what Aahuti was saying. I think, there's a huge amount to be done in this space. And no matter where I seem to go, really seeing the same stuff again and again.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really special things about working in health tech as opposed to other fields of tech, is that you can really see the impact that your work has on the lives of friends, family, people that you know, in a way that possibly wouldn't happen if you're working in other fields of technology. Yeah, for me personally, working in PR, it's kind of a bit of a holy grail moment to get to listen to some producers from the BBC, from BBC Sounds and from BBC Breakfast Television, talking to a big group of PRs about their plans for the future of their programmes and for their services, how they're developing them, their goals, what their audience want, and how they're evolving their offerings to meet the needs of that audience. Just getting to hear some tips and tricks about how to pitch in your clients to be featured on BBC Sounds podcasts and on BBC Breakfast Television, which was really great to get those insights directly from the horse's mouth. So that was a great event that I went to this week. All right, so it is only right to kick things off this week with a story that Toby is very well placed to talk about. And that's a report from the BBC about a new home blood testing device called Liberty, created by Entia, that has been given regulatory approval. Toby, tell us what we need to know about this.
So obviously this was one of the absolute biggest highlights of the week, but I didn't want to sort of have this as my opening sort of thing to talk to. But it's been a really wonderful week for us. I think for those of you who managed to actually catch the news announcement, either at the BBC or any of the other sort of news outlets who have been talking about it, we achieved a major world's first here at Entia, and that was the regulatory approval of the world's first ever at-home full blood count analyzer. For some of you listening, this may not mean much, but essentially when you go through cancer therapy, one of the major toxicities and complications of treatment is suppression of your blood counts. So low hemoglobin, which is responsible for transporting oxygen around your body, low platelets, which can be used within clotting. If you don't have enough, you can get things like bruising. And lastly, I think, your immune system, so white blood cells getting particularly affected. And this is because one of the key ways that cancer therapy actually works, or some cancer therapies work, is that they target cells that reproduce quickly. And in your body, these blood cells often get produced very quickly and so get affected by the cancer therapies that are also treating and stopping this high growth cancer tumors. And so about 60-70% of all treatments that people receive will actually develop some sort of complication from low blood counts. And so the fact that we have created something that allows patients to really self-test in their own home without having to go into a hospital unlocks a huge new opportunity and a new window into patients' health. And what we have here at Entia is sort of not just a blood analyzer, but Liberty actually refers to a much larger holistic system. So everything that we are doing at the company is about trying to really reduce the impact of cancer therapy side effects, and doing that by predicting and preventing them. And in order to do that, you really have to understand the person's health. And a lot of individuals have a very unique pathway and a unique journey that they go through. It's often very hard to actually predict how people will respond to treatment before they start on it. And that goes with both the response, but also with the tolerance of the treatment. So we realized very early on when we created the company, and we really wanted to sort of try and improve the way that cancer care was being delivered, that the best way to do that was to create new technologies that could be placed in patients' homes. And I think what we've seen is this sort of wonderful opportunity to not only move more care from the hospital into the community and into places where people want to be spending their time, but we've also been sort of able to unlock all of these new insights that allow us to sort of better understand their health and actually move from what is currently quite a reactive model of care, where we give people a treatment, we send them home for weeks at a time, we say, here's a phone number, give us a call if something's going wrong, to a model of care where we're actually saying, look, we're going to send you home with this monitoring solutions. We're going to sort of, it's not going to interfere into your day-to-day life. It shouldn't medicalize you further. It should actually be a simple 10-minute use, maybe every other day, to just fill in this information. And from that, we're able to actually start moving to this sort of prediction model where we can see the individuals who are actually deteriorating, who maybe aren't responding as we'd expect or aren't tolerating the treatment as we expect. And we're actually able to sort of intervene much earlier. And that earlier intervention is like a huge change, because there's well-established pathways to treat patients who are deteriorating, but it's just knowing that they're deteriorating before it's too late. I think what we've seen is a lot of individuals that are going through therapy, once something does go wrong and they are picking up the phone to call acute hotlines, at that point, they're often being referred into the hospital, they're being assessed, and they're being placed into a bed. And as I think all of us here know, like, the one thing the NHS does not have capacity for is more patients in beds. And so we have an opportunity here to actually sort of help prevent that from happening in the first place. But we've also got some opportunities to actually help discharge patients earlier by giving them appropriate monitoring solutions that actually sort of safeguard them when they're outside of the hospital setting, but allow them to be brought back in if something actually does go wrong.
Yeah, and one thing we do love talking about in Pigeon is AI. Can you explain how you're using AI?
So it's something that sort of actually is quite integral to a lot of the approaches that we take. So starting with the actual blood count analyzer that we've developed. So this is a wonderful piece of equipment that's very simple for patients to use, but has some phenomenally advanced technology inside it. And there's a reason not many or no company has actually done this before, is because it is very complex. And I think the arrival of a lot of new technologies has really allowed us to sort of produce a solution that we can place in patients' home at a price point that is actually feasible and sustainable, because we have access to things like sort of machine learning based algorithms that after we take a picture of a blood sample, we can actually sort of dissect this image and actually work out how many cells of a particular type are present without humans having to look at it without having to do some more complex flow cytometry. So, we have a really nice machine learning based approach to actually quantify the number of cells in the person's blood sample. So in this case, from a finger prick, you take a drop of blood, place it into a consumable, that goes in the device. And then after the picture's taken of the sample, it's then having a software on the actual solution on the device that actually counts all of those individual cells. That is just one particular application that we use internally, but where I'm most excited is actually what we can be doing with the information that we are collecting from patients' homes. And it's that granular day-to-day insight and information that becomes really, really powerful and very, very unique. So we've got data sets that just didn't even exist within clinical trial settings, let alone in the real world setting. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen is that just providing that raw information to healthcare professionals can be quite limiting. So this is new information that people don't have a history of working with. They're having to build up their own individual experience of how to interpret this data. And it's always going to be limited by the number of patients that they get to see day to day. And what we can do here from a machine learning or an AI perspective is actually take all of that data across the country, across the world that we're working with around specific regimens, and actually collate them, tie them to particular patient outcomes, and then actually train our own algorithms to be able to identify trends in the data that actually are going to result in a serious complication. And so then you can start arming healthcare professionals with these insights saying, well, in 2 days' time, we think there's an 80% risk of this patient developing febrile neutropenia. And that gives enough time to actually intervene with something like prophylactic antibiotics to actually prevent that infection from taking hold and ending up with a hospitalization. So it's a really powerful opportunity to take that data and act on it.
Can I just jump in, because I'm so curious about a few things here. Firstly, amazing. I'm absolutely blown away. It's such a great example. So this week we've been talking to a number of different stage startups about, just different verticals in the UK market, how to commercialize, etc. And this is a great example of an innovation that's been developed and designed with the context in mind. Where does it fit within the clinical pathway? Who is it for? Who are the different stakeholders, that have to interact and use it in some shape or form? And therefore it's going to be designed with those different stakeholders in mind, not just the end user as a patient. So absolutely a brilliant example of a really intentional kind of innovation. I was curious about whether the data that you're collecting is also going to help bridge that gap that we have in terms of data for women's health and cancer, because it is a huge gap. A lot of trials, for these kind of cancer treatments haven't really been inclusive of women, and enough women, even if there are women, and certainly not the variety, the variation in terms of demographics and ethnicities, etc. So do you think your solution has that potential to start reporting on outcomes by demographic, by gender, and just be able to bridge that gap in some way?
100%. I mean, this is lifting the lid on something that we've just never had an opportunity to look at before. So I don't have all the answers right now because we don't have all the data sets. We're still building them. But I've already been having conversations with some leading breast cancer clinicians here in the UK, where we've been talking about the fact that they are using certain regimens that were developed 30, 40 years ago with fairly reasonable robustness to their clinical trials. But again, in terms of demographics that were used and incorporated into that, highly controlled settings. And they've been working off dosing guidelines that probably haven't changed in possibly at least a decade. And what they were interested in was that for some of their patients, maybe of a certain age, that there might be a difference in terms of how much they can tolerate certain dosing. And actually, if you can make a much more personalized approach to dosing schedules, or how much of a drug is actually being compounded and given to the patients, this could actually have real tangible survival differences in terms of how that careful balance between toxicity and efficacy that many clinicians or oncologists are having to tread as they're treating their patients. But yeah, absolutely. We have so much information and opportunities to learn here.
Amazing. But your data strategy, the development of that underlying kind of data strategy, what's pinning this down in terms of what pieces of information you're collecting and how it's organized so that therefore you can utilize that. I presume that is kind of enabling the capture of this level of granularity so that we can interrogate and get the insights in this way.
Yes, and we've been working really closely recently with the Christie up in Manchester, which is Europe's largest single-site cancer centre. They have been incredibly supportive in our entire approach over managing cancer patients. They see this as like being the future of how care can be delivered. And we've been working with them to actually design any studies that we do or any work that we do to always be thinking about, well, what are the outcomes? What are the experiences patients are going through, so that we can be tying this longitudinal data sets to the outcomes, even if it's perhaps a 999 call or an admission to an A&E centre outside of their network. We're still going the length to actually make sure we capture those interactions so that we've got them to go back and scrutinise at a later point, because we know that there's going to be value. It's just not entirely clear just yet where it's all going to come from. So it's very important for us that we do build very robust, very well-structured and clean data sets that can help with learning and informing either AI models or actually for third parties to go and actually look at and understand or ask new questions.
And now you've hit this major milestone. You've got the UKCA approval. What's the next big milestone? What are you working towards? What about market launch?
So with the regulatory approval, this gives us access to the UK market. We're working very closely with a large number of different NHS centres now to make sure that this becomes available to patients. We've been very fortunate to be collaborating with some major life science companies and pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer, I think, has talked about this publicly previously, but supporting breast cancer patients in a very important space with Liberty. So for us, I think, the real focus right now is actually getting this into the hands of patients and really building up further robust data sets that both support the clinical impact, but also the economic impact. And I think to Aahuti's point, in the healthcare space, there are so many stakeholders that you have to appease and make sure that you're actually addressing their needs. And obviously, from a patient's perspective, we've seen a lot of data already over how much this means for them and how impactful this can be. And I think we had one of the patients, Lynn, speaking to the BBC about what this actually meant for her, getting access just to the blood analyzer by itself. But it's going beyond the patient and the healthcare professionals, actually look also at the healthcare provider and the payer as the NHS, and actually looking at where are the opportunities here to not only improve efficiencies and actually improve quality of care, but actually to help support cost savings and again preventing some of these downstream high cost interactions. So a lot of focus over the next 12, 18 months to really reinforcing the data sets that talk to those points. So alongside that, we've also got international ambitions, and for cancer patients, regardless of whether they're in mainland Europe or over in the US, there are very similar pathways. People are experiencing cancer and cancer therapy in a very similar way. And so we are very, very keen to make sure that we are offering these opportunities to enhance clinical practice and patient experiences overseas. And so, we are working now with regulators internationally to make sure that the core blood count analyzer alongside the digital ecosystem is coming online and being made available to other patients and healthcare providers around the world.
So it sounds like there's plenty there to keep you busy for the next few months. How many people have you got in the team at the moment?
So we're about 30 people at the moment, actively hiring at the moment as well. So, yeah.
Okay, amazing. I feel like we could stay talking about this for the entire episode, but we must move on because we have 2 other stories that we need to cover. So let's scoot on to the next one. So it is Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and we are going to put a Healthtech spin on it by looking at some news from Healthtech World about an MHRA and NICE partnership funded by Wellcome, which has been launched to address key challenges for regulating and evaluating digital mental health technologies. And they've been securing input from patients, from the public, and from mental health professionals. Aahuti, why don't you step in and give us a rundown of this story and any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I've got quite a few thoughts, and some of them are confusion as well. I have to say. So, just trying to figure out really how this fits in. So, firstly, definitely a welcome move. Pardon the pun, given it was funded by Wellcome. So definitely a welcome move, and some useful outcomes already from the report. So apparently, it's a 3-year project. It began in 2023. So this kind of first phase of deliverables, this is how I'm understanding it, has produced some useful outcomes. So there's a conceptual framework around how to categorize different digital mental health solutions. And I think the intention is for this to be used so that these solutions are assessed in a risk proportionate manner. And it's quite topical at the moment. So on Tuesday, one of the other events I was at was the City Spotlight event. So it was a panel event organised by City, which is the Centre of Innovation and Transformation at Guy's and St Thomas's. And Nadine, who hosted that panel, brought a few of us together to talk about mental health. And this came up in our discussions because the regulation of mental health, I think there's still confusion around what's actually needed and necessary here. And there's still a school of thought around, no, everything should have a randomized control trial in terms of doing the clinical validation, and that should feed into regulation. But we know that mental health and mental health challenges are on a spectrum. So we don't necessarily need all of those solutions to be at that level of clinical validation. And in fact, in a way, whilst we do have a lot of solutions and it's ever so crowded in the market, one positive of having so many solutions is we're allowing patient choice, because when it comes to mental health, at the highest level for common mental health disorders, we've got 13 different disorders. If you break them down, it's just expansive in terms of the variations of those different disorders. And then at the end of the day, we're all individuals, right? So in a way, it's a positive thing that we have so many choices and solutions. Not all of them need the same level of validation and regulation. So all of this is definitely a welcome move. And what I'm left a little bit confused about, though, is a couple of things. So NICE had developed an evidence standard framework, ESF, and it was meant to guide innovators to pick the most appropriate level of evidence generation that they have to produce for their solution, given the level of risk and, what kind of classification of medical device it is and what the claims are and in what context is going to be used. So I'm kind of left wondering how this is going to fit, because essentially this is another framework which provides a classification only focused on digital mental health, of course. But nevertheless, it kind of feels like it's sitting in that same space. So that's kind of one open-ended piece for me on this work, but definitely other useful outcomes in this first set of deliverables as well.
What often worries me with sort of bringing in sort of new frameworks is that it just creates so much noise for the companies actually operating in this space. I think sort of NICE for a long time have been sort of getting involved with sort of like the medtech, digital health space, trying to sort of lay out frameworks for sort of evidence generation. What I think sort of has often concerned me is that when you actually then go to healthcare providers, very few of them, in my experience, have actually been referring back to any of the NICE guidelines or actually even aware of them in the first place. And I think they're important from like a clinical utility perspective and sort of making sure that sort of companies are creating robust, good quality data. And I think often are very useful if you actually go and read them. But it's whether like introducing another framework like this, like you said, Aahuti, is it actually going to sort of help companies any more than what's already out there? I like the regulatory part that actually sort of helping bring clarity for companies about do they need regulation? Are they sort of actually outside of the scope of it? Do you think that it's actually lagging or leading where we're at? As in, do we need this right now, or is there still sort of like a couple of years left for us to sort of really work out how impactful some of these technologies are? Because I think we're not seeing, or we're still very much going through this adoption stage of sort of digital therapeutics and sort of digital innovations. And I worry that, again, sort of we seem to be quite good often in Europe, but actually in the UK, it's sort of perhaps sort of bringing in regulations quite quickly before sort of letting maybe an area mature enough that we actually really know where the boundaries should be drawn and sort of, what level of evidence is needed.
Yeah, I guess this is where I'm kind of left a bit puzzled, because there must be some shortcomings in that NICE ESF framework for us to feel that we need something really specific for digital mental health. But then we have a lot of solutions in other disease areas and clinical domains. It's not like other areas are also not crowded. So I guess this is something that's been initiated by Wellcome Trust, and they obviously have a huge focus on mental health. And I guess in that sense, they're showing some leadership, and perhaps by involving NICE, it will help further refine the overall ESF framework as well. Mm-hmm. I am still wondering, though, that you're right. I think you're right, actually, that do we need more kind of years of some of these technologies and solutions in practice? We get more real world data. We understand really what the shelf life is in terms of the effectiveness of some of these treatments. Because if you look at some of the early value assessments that were done by NICE on solutions targeting depression and anxiety, most of those solutions that made it into those early value assessments didn't necessarily have a high level of evidence generation. You know, there were a couple that stood out better than the others, but I would have thought we could correct that with the existing practices and protocols that we have in place for national health tech assessments and regulation more generally. So I feel like the press that is around this doesn't necessarily fully explain why we need this specifically at this point in time, and why the existing protocols and frameworks are potentially falling short, or are they? And I think there needs to be a bit more explanation of this. Otherwise, it is going to cause more noise in the space. It might also deter companies from entering the UK. The UK has its own challenges in terms of scaling technologies, and this might just add to the noise if companies start feeling that this is another layer of burden, regulatory burden, that they have got to absorb. What I think is interesting, though, in this, and in a way, the findings from their stakeholder research, and many of those stakeholders were people with lived experience, kind of contradict the need for this, because they did a whole bunch of research and spoke to lots of different stakeholders. It's quite detailed in the report in terms of the breakdown of who they spoke to and what they asked them. But the end users of these solutions have said that they're generally willing to accept a general trial and error approach when it comes to digital mental health solutions. They felt that the app should be part of a wider treatment package. So it should be alongside regular therapy sessions, which again lowers the need for that extreme level of validation and regulation. And actually that they are happy to try out an app on recommendation from family, friends, or clinicians. And they accept that something that's useful for now might not be useful in 6 months' time, and they're really happy to kind of swap and change. So I hope that the team that are behind this are kind of joining up the dots here and then linking it back to existing protocols and practices around national health tech assessment and regulation, and tying in with the medtech strategy, because there's quite a lot of work being done by the MedTech Directorate under David Lawson to try and make it easier to accelerate the safe use of digital technologies, not just mental health specifically, but, you know, sort of smoothing out that regulatory pathway as well. So fingers crossed that the big shots are joining up all the dots here.
On the point of like sort of joining up the dots, I think the interesting point that you raise around sort of the cost to the companies as well about actually generating the evidence. So if more regulations are brought in, a higher degree of burden on sort of like upfront evidence generation, I feel that then puts a lot of pressure on sort of needing to raise more money for these companies to actually bring these products to market. And I think given that it's a crowded space, given that we're not seeing necessarily the reimbursement frameworks being created that are giving sort of, what everyone would hope would have been sort of the digital therapeutic sort of reimbursements that might be equivalent to drugs. That just doesn't seem to be happening. And that commoditization of solutions being available worries me that you get this mismatch between what the price needs to be to repay the cost of evidence generation versus what the healthcare system really wants to pay for these solutions as well.
And this is where I hope someone's joining up the dots, because in the medtech strategy and the work going on under the medtech directorate, there is this consultation that went out about Part 9 of the drug tariff. Part of that consultation was, can we have apps listed on that in the way that we have drugs listed on that, so that there is this kind of more straightforward route to reimbursement. But of course, if that proceeds and goes ahead, in a way, we're introducing still another layer, another almost toll gate that companies have to pass through if they've already gone through all of their other regulatory pieces and compliance pieces, and they've done their DTAC and they've got their class 1-2 medical device and they've got their ISO standards and all of that. This is yet another layer. So I just wonder how much this is adding to the actual utility and ensuring a better quality of solution versus repeating, much of what can be done through existing practices.
Well, I'm sure this is a kind of topic that we will pick up again in future episodes of the podcast. It's one we've talked about before, and it's one which we keep coming back to for the right reasons, because it's something which is constantly evolving and kind of worthy of focus each time. So yeah, watch this space on that story. Brilliant, guys. Let's move on to our third story of the week. And this is an opinion piece which has been published in Femtech World by Kat James, who's head of new projects at Consultant Connect. And her article is titled, "Women Are Left in Limbo, How Telemedicine Can Cut Down NHS Gynaecology Waiting Times." In Kat's piece, she shares the figure that over 600,000 women are currently waiting for gynaecology treatment, which is way up from before the pandemic. And 80% of those waiting say that it's impacting their mental health. 77% are struggling to work or socialise on account of the pressures put on them by having to wait for this treatment. And Kat's main argument in this piece is that one of the reasons why waiting lists are getting so long is because there's this disconnect between primary care and secondary care. So it's kind of a case of women going to their GP, their GP referring them on, and then perhaps being seen by a specialist, then referred back to their GP, and this constant kind of transitioning between different service areas in the NHS with long waits in between being seen and not much communication. So Kat's kind of outlining a strategy which Consultant Connect are putting in place. They've deployed various solutions into the NHS to try and join up the dots between primary and secondary care. So for example, they've got a menopause line. So GPs can instantly get in touch with consultants who specialise in menopause. So when they have a patient in their consulting room, rather than having to refer them on to the specialist and the patient then waits a long time, the GP can instantly contact the specialist, secure kind of on the spot advice about the best course of treatment and kind of immediately begin to action it. And Consultant Connect have various other similar projects like that. But my question for Toby and Aahuti is, do we think initiatives like this are enough to make a difference to waiting lists? Do they really unlock capacity for GPs and improve outcomes for patients, or do they just add another layer of complication to the work? How can we address this massive gynaecology backlog in a sustainable manner?
I think from my side, just on first principle or just hearing it, when I first read this, I love it. I really like this idea of connecting primary care with secondary care, getting more specialist insights more readily available in primary care. Like, it seems on the very high level surface really interesting. I wonder then when we sort of, look a bit deeper, where's the capacity, where are the people coming from to actually support GP practices? Because I'm assuming that there are sort of some specialists that would normally be practicing in a clinic, seeing patients one after the other coming through, that are now not doing that and are instead supporting a triaging line to GP practices to sort of actually then sort of send them in the right place. Now, by the look of it, the data suggests it looks pretty promising that it's preventing a lot of those follow-ups. What I'd like to see, I guess, is the time spent managing those patients in the primary care setting and how much of a specialist's time was needed versus how much would have happened if they continued down the existing path. But I think,
I think ultimately it all comes down to seeing the data on that, because I've worked with companies doing very similar things to this for quite a long time now. And I mean, their kind of line on this is that the consultants save so much time by not having inappropriate referrals into their clinics, that they see the value in participating for a set number of hours a week in this kind of on-call hotline service with the GPs, and that they notice that it saves them ultimately workload further down the line, and they see better outcomes for their patients because of it. But I think you really do need to see the data on that to make an assessment.
I agree with Toby's initial impression. I just think we have to challenge how healthcare delivery happens today. I think the more that we assume that we've got to kind of stick to the current established pathways and models, we're just not really going to transform. We're just going to kind of plaster on solutions, insert solutions into what ultimately is an outdated model of care. So if you look at a corporate organization, so my background for 20 years was corporate change and transformation and, redefining operating models to help them kind of scale and grow. And if you transfer some of those insights and learnings from all of these other industries, and how corporates function, things go wrong at the interfaces. That's where the delays, the bottlenecks happen. It's when handovers happen. Now, whether you're talking about between primary and secondary care, or you're talking about, corporate processes in a multinational company, that's where the productivity gets lost. That's where the capacity issues creep in. That's where people, stakeholders, customers end up falling between the cracks and end up being dissatisfied with service. So I love this way of thinking about healthcare delivery. It's definitely refreshing that there's a solution out there that's starting to challenge some of that. I was left with a few questions about it, because one of the capacity issues currently is primary care. It is the fact that it's difficult to get an appointment with a GP. So that's kind of like the first bottleneck in someone's health journey, that if you can't even get to see a GP, then how do you solve for that bottleneck first? But let's kind of say, all right, we're past that. There's lots of capacity constraints along the whole chain of events. So there'll be other solutions that help GPs solve their capacity issues. But then you're in with the GP and they're using this Consultant Connect solution. Then it makes me think, well, how do they manage this in a 9-minute appointment slot? So it's hard enough conveying a comprehensive picture of what you're feeling as a patient, and for the GP to process that, look at your health records, make a decision. But if now in that 9 minutes, they're actually kind of getting on to Consultant Connect's platform and speaking to a specialist and organizing a referral, that's going to add minutes on to the appointment, which then means, you're throwing out the capacity modeling again, in terms of the front door to primary care. I was also wondering about who are these consultants on the platform for Consultant Connect, because is the platform, and I'm not sure about this from reading the article, but is the platform utilizing the consultants that are in secondary care anyway, and just kind of giving them an easier mechanism to communicate so that they're not waiting for this referral to then respond? Or have they employed other consultants who are then making a decision and then that referral goes back into secondary care? Wasn't really clear on that, but, depending on what the situation is, I guess I've got more thoughts. My final thought, though, which really does worry me, is whether this is actually going to broaden inequities in healthcare. Regions that have this platform get quicker solutions and treatment pathways for patients compared to regions that don't. And what triggered that thought is this example that was given in the article in Coventry, this 54-year-old patient. The GP moved the appointment sooner than the 2-week wait. and that patient used, the GP used Consultant Connect, and that patient was then, able to get kind of referred a lot quicker. So I'm just like, I'm kind of thinking this has to be a national rollout. It has to be a universal healthcare delivery model, despite the fact that we have ICBs who decide on their own, population strategies. There are certain solutions, and this is one of them, where you can't do this a region by region approach. Otherwise, we're just going to broaden healthcare inequities.
Yeah, it also talks to the fact that you're dealing with two very different stakeholders of primary care and secondary care here. And the budgeting issues here is just like, who's paying? You've got GP providers or GP practices that are actually seeing the patients using this solution, but the real beneficiary is probably the waiting lists decreasing on the hospital side. But then is a trust then going to actually commission a service that then reaches dozens of GP practices in the local area on the hope that it's going to delay or decrease referrals into them? And I can see some difficult conversations happening. It's the commissioning side on like the trusts about whether they should be investing in something like this in the community when GPs are the ones utilising and benefiting from it. So that national point, I think, sometimes there are innovations like this which straddle two very different stakeholder groups that really would benefit from sort of some national guidance.
Brilliant. That was great, guys. We've got 3 really well-rounded conversations there. So that's the end of the news for this week, which just leaves time for our podcast recommendation. And this week we are shamelessly plugging our sister podcast, the Healthtech podcast, as James is joined by the one and only Keith Grimes to discuss how large language models are transforming healthcare. So we might be biased, but definitely worth a listen, especially if you're interested in the impact that LLMs are having on healthcare delivery. And then I want to summarise an event. I want to shout out an event that's coming up this week. So that's the Radical Health Festival, which is happening in Helsinki, May 21st to 23rd. But if you are interested in more events, definitely visit the SomX events page and subscribe to our new SomX events roundup to see all the best upcoming health tech, biotech and healthcare events and grab some discounts on tickets as well. Also make sure you subscribe to Pigeon for job opportunities. So we've got some really great ones in there this week. Clinical engineer at Amina, head of brand at Hertility, engineering manager at Peppy, head of IT systems at LV. And Toby, do you want to shout out some job vacancies that you've got open at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. We can't get enough of data scientists at the moment. So very interested in anyone who's keen to reshape the way that cancer care is being delivered by joining the team. Also actively looking for internship positions, a couple of mix of roles as well. So if you're interested in just dipping your toe into the medtech digital health space, this would be a great opportunity.
Great. We will drop everyone's LinkedIns into the episode description for this so that you'll be able to reach out to Toby on LinkedIn if you feel like you're a good fit for any of those roles. So that just leaves me to thank Aahuti and Toby and, of course, Adama, our producer. That was the Healthtech Pigeon team analysing the health tech news so you don't have to. Join us next week and check out all the articles we've talked about, some of the best jobs and pods in health tech at healthtechpigeon.com.